I watched from 300 feet as my helicopter dropped a magnificent cascade of farm scented, fresh manure directly onto cardboard Karen, turning her HOA meeting into a chaotic masterpiece of suburban justice. But let me tell you, that moment in Maple Grove Estates was a wild ride that started with a clipboard tyrant who decided she could ground me, literally. Before I continue the story, post in the comments below, where are you looking from? Give me a like if you were shocked by the helicopter with manure that threw Karen too. Hey there, I'm Ethan Carter, a former Air Force pilot turned freelance medevac flyer, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA Karen, you're gonna want to stick around for this story. I live in a quiet little neighborhood in Georgia called Maple Grove Estates, big lots, open skies, and the kind of place where you'd think people mind their own business. I bought my property 7 years ago for one reason. The backyard had a perfect clearing for a private helipad. See, I'm not just some guy with a fancy toy. I fly emergency medical missions, delivering organs, rushing doctors to remote spots, saving lives. My helicopter isn't a hobby, it's my lifeline, my purpose. The FAA approved my setup, the county gave me the green light, but the Maple Grove HOA? Oh, they had other plans. It all started 6 months ago with a passive-aggressive note taped to my mailbox. Helicopters are not permitted in residential zones. This isn't an airfield, it read, and signed, but I knew exactly who wrote it. Karen, mid-50s, always in a pastel cardigan, armed with a clipboard she treated like a scepter, and those giant sunglasses that screamed, "I'm watching you." Karen's been the HOA president for 8 years, self-appointed, of course, because no one else wanted the gig. She once fined my neighbor Emily for having a bird feeder that was too reflective and might distract drivers. I'm not kidding. This woman was a walking, talking suburban nightmare. At first, I tried to play nice. I adjusted my flight paths to avoid the oak trees where the local squirrels apparently held their HOA meetings too. I limited my takeoffs to twice a week, always during daylight, and I even invited Karen over to see my FAA certifications. She didn't show up. Instead, I got another note. The noise is disturbing our peace. Consider the children. The children? Lady, the nearest kid lives 400 yards away, and I'm pretty sure they're more annoyed by your voice at HOA meetings than my rotor blades. Things got worse at the next community meeting. I walked into the Maple Grove clubhouse, expecting a boring discussion about mailbox colors, but Karen had other plans. She stood up, her voice quivering with fake concern, and announced, "We have an unapproved aircraft terrorizing our skies. We don't know if it's safe, or what it's carrying." The room gasped like she'd just uncovered a smuggling ring. I stood up, trying to keep my cool, and said, "Karen, that's my helicopter. I'm FAA certified, and I've saved 4 lives this year alone with that threat." She didn't even blink. "This neighborhood isn't zoned for your ego, Ethan," she snapped, and the room went silent. I could feel every eye on me, judging, whispering. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was war. I thought I'd seen the worst of it, but Karen was just getting started. 2 weeks later, I was 600 miles away on a medevac mission, flying a heart transplant to a hospital in Tennessee. It was a high-stakes flight, gusty winds, a tight deadline, and a patient's life on the line. I landed at the hospital, handed off the organ, and exhaled for the first time in 6 hours. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily, my neighbor who always kept me in the loop. "Ethan, you need to get back here. Karen did something insane." My stomach dropped. I called her immediately. "What happened?" I asked, my voice shaking. Emily hesitated, then said, "She had your helicopter towed. It's gone." I couldn't believe it. Towed? A helicopter? I left it on my helipad, behind my garage, with a sign that said, "Emergency contact, Ethan Carter," in case anyone needed to reach me. I was saving a life, and Karen decided that was the perfect time to strike. When I got home 2 days later, my helipad was empty, just a few tire marks and a crumpled flyer for the HOA's spring cleanup initiative. Tucked under my door was an invoice from a towing company in the next county, $3,200 for removal of unauthorized aircraft, authorized by Karen herself, complete with her loopy signature in blue ink. And a handwritten note, "Maybe now you'll respect the rules." I stood there, staring at that note, my blood boiling. This wasn't just petty, it was personal. Karen didn't just cross a line. She burned the whole bridge and danced on the ashes. But if she thought she could ground me, she was about to learn a hard lesson. I don't just fly, I soar. And I was going to make sure her perfect little HOA kingdom got a taste of justice, straight from the sky. What would you have done in my shoes? Drop a comment below and let me know. Have you ever dealt with a Karen like this? I'd love to hear your stories while I tell you how I turned the tables on her in the most epic way possible. I stared at that invoice for what felt like an eternity, the $3,200 charge burning a hole through my sanity, while Karen's smug little note, "Maybe now you'll respect the rules," mocked me from the countertop. My hand shook as I crumpled it into a ball, but I didn't throw it away. Oh no, that piece of paper was going to be my fuel. My reminder that Karen had just turned this into a full-blown battle. I wasn't just going to get my helicopter back. I was going to make sure she regretted ever crossing me. The next morning, I was on the phone with my cousin Ryan, a real estate and aviation lawyer who lives for this kind of chaos. Ryan's the kind of guy who'd argue with a stop sign and win, so I knew he'd have my back. "She did what?" he shouted through the phone, his voice a mix of disbelief and glee. I walked him through the whole thing, the notes, the HOA meeting, the towing while I was on a medevac mission. I could hear him pacing on the other end, already plotting. "Ethan, this isn't just an overreach, it's a legal dumpster fire. She messed with an FAA-regulated aircraft on private property without consent. That's federal territory, man. Send me everything you've got." I emailed him the invoice, the note, and photos of my empty helipad, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and hope. Ryan called back an hour later, his tone sharp. "Karen's in deep. She violated FAA Part 91, and she didn't even notify you. We're filing complaints with the FAA and the county today. But first, let's get your bird back." The towing company was 80 miles away in a dusty lot off Highway 52, a place that looked more like a graveyard for broken dreams than a legit business. I drove up in my beat-up Ford pickup, still wearing the same clothes from my medevac trip, exhaustion clinging to me like a second skin. The manager, a guy named Tim with a nervous twitch, met me at the gate. "We don't usually deal with helicopters," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact as he led me to my chopper. There it was, my pride and joy, sitting between a rusted crop duster and a pile of busted lawnmowers, covered in a thin layer of dust. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a machine, it was my lifeline, the thing that got me through the darkest days after I left the Air Force. Seeing it treated like some abandoned junk made me want to scream. "Who authorized this?" I asked, my voice low but shaking. Tim pulled out a work order on Maple Grove HOA letterhead, signed by Karen in that same loopy blue ink. "She said it was a safety hazard, claimed it was abandoned," he muttered. I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles turned white. A safety hazard? I was saving a life while she played suburban dictator. I signed the release papers, paid the $3,200, money I'd have to scrape together from my savings, and flew my helicopter back home, the whole time picturing Karen's smug face. As I landed on my helipad, the rotor blades still spinning, I made a promise to myself. She wasn't going to get away with this. Meanwhile, across town at the Maple Grove clubhouse, Karen was holding court at an emergency HOA meeting she'd called to address community concerns. I got the play-by-play later from Emily, who'd gone to spy for me. Karen stood at the podium, her clipboard in hand, and declared, "We've taken decisive action to remove a dangerous aircraft from our neighborhood. Safety first, always." The room clapped, like she'd just saved them from a dragon. Emily said a few people whispered doubts, but no one dared challenge her. Karen went on, "Ethan Carter thinks he's above the rules, but I've shown him that Maple Grove Estates is no place for reckless behavior." Reckless? I was 600 miles away saving a life while she was plotting her little coup. The audacity of this woman was unreal. Back at my place, I was already planning my next move. I wasn't going to let Karen turn me into the neighborhood villain. I'd spent years building a life here, earning the trust of my neighbors, even if they didn't always understand my job. I'd flown little Timmy's dad to the hospital after a car accident last year, and I'd airlifted Mrs. Jenkins' sister during a flood. I wasn't the bad guy here, Karen was. And if she wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. I started digging through my contacts, looking for a way to hit back without breaking a single law. That's when I remembered Hank, a farmer I'd met a few years back at a county fair. Hank had a small operation about 30 miles out, and he'd once mentioned he had equipment for spreading compost from the air. A light bulb went off in my head. If Karen wanted to mess with my helicopter, I'd show her just how precise it could be. I drove out to Hank's farm that afternoon, the Georgia sun beating down on my windshield as I rehearsed what I'd say. Hank was exactly as I remembered him, tall, wiry, with a sunburned face and a grin that said he'd seen it all. "Ethan Carter, as I live and breathe," he called out, wiping his hands on his overalls as I stepped out of my truck. "What brings a fly boy like you out here?" I didn't waste time. Hank, I need a favor. You still got that compost spreader for aerial drops? His grin widened. You ain't fertilizing no crops with that look in your eye, are you? I smirked. Let's just say I've got a special delivery for a very special HOA meeting. Hank slapped his knee and laughed so hard I thought he'd fall over. Boy, you're trouble. I like it. Come on, let's see what I've got in the barn. As Hank rummaged through his equipment, I couldn't stop thinking about Karen's speech at the clubhouse. Emily had texted me a photo of her standing there, all prim and proper, basking in the applause of her loyal followers. It made my blood boil all over again. But then Hank pulled out a rusty old bucket attachment, the kind you'd mount on a small helicopter for spreading compost. This here's your ticket, he said, patting it like it was a prized horse. Lightly used, still got some life in it. You want fresh compost or aged? I didn't hesitate. Aged. I want the full effect, but nothing that'll cause a health hazard. Hank nodded, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Smart man. I'll throw in an extra scoop for free. By the time I left Hank's farm, I had the bucket loaded in my truck and a plan forming in my mind. Karen thought she'd won by towing my helicopter, but she just lit a fire under me. I wasn't going to let her turn my passion into a punchline. She wanted to play HOA queen? Fine. I'd show her what it meant to mess with someone who had the sky on his side. And as I drove home, the sun setting over the rolling hills of Georgia, I couldn't help but smile. Karen had no idea what was coming. The sun was dipping low over Maple Grove Estates as I pulled into my driveway, the compost bucket from Hank's farm rattling in the bed of my truck, a silent promise of the chaos to come. I couldn't stop picturing Karen's smug face at that HOA meeting, basking in her little victory while I'd been out there saving a life. But now I had a plan, and a bucket, that was going to turn her perfect suburban kingdom upside down. I just needed to make sure every detail was perfect, because if I was going to do this, I was doing it right. I spent the next morning in my garage, tinkering with the bucket attachment. It was a clunky piece of equipment, but with a few tweaks, I got it mounted onto my helicopter's undercarriage. I wired the release mechanism to my cockpit controls, testing it with a bag of sand to make sure it dropped exactly where I wanted. Each test was a success. The sand hit my target, a chalk circle I'd drawn on the helipad, within inches. I wasn't just planning a prank, I was engineering a masterpiece. I even added a small camera to the rig to record the drop from above. If I was going to do this, I wanted proof of the moment Karen's HOA empire came crashing down in a cloud of compost. While I was fine-tuning my setup, across town at the Maple Grove Community Park, Karen was in full preparation mode for the HOA's quarterly Unity celebration. Emily, my trusty neighbor-turned-spy, had slipped me the details earlier that day over coffee. It's happening Saturday at noon, she'd whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and fear. Karen's pulling out all the stops, catered lunch, banners, even a guest speaker. She invited Senator Harper to show off how model our neighborhood is. I nearly choked on my coffee. Senator Harper? The state senator? Karen was using her HOA throne to climb the political ladder, and my helicopter drama was her stepping stone. She's giving a speech about maintaining order in uncertain times, Emily added, rolling her eyes. You know she's going to mention you. Oh, I knew. And that only made my plan sweeter. Back in my garage, I realized Senator Harper's presence complicated things. Dropping compost 20 feet from an elected official could land me in hot water, more than I was willing to risk. I didn't want to be on the evening news as the guy who ruined a political event with a manure shower. But then an idea hit me, one that was smarter, funnier, and way more targeted. I grabbed a stack of old Amazon boxes from my recycling bin and some paint I had lying around. Over the next few hours, I crafted a life-sized cardboard cutout of Karen, complete with her signature oversized sunglasses, a clipboard, and a scowl that could curdle milk. I even painted Citation Queen across the bottom in bright red letters. It was a work of art, if I do say so myself. I'd planned it just off to the side of the HOA meeting area, far enough from the senator to keep things safe, but close enough for everyone to get the message. Friday night, under the cover of darkness, I crept into the community park with the cardboard Karen tucked under my arm. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass, and the park was quiet except for the hum of crickets. I staked the cutout into the ground about 30 feet from where Karen's podium would be, adjusting it so it faced the crowd like a paper monument to pettiness. I stepped back to admire my work, the moonlight casting a shadow of her clipboard across the lawn. It was perfect. I flew a quick test run over the park that night, locking in the GPS coordinates and checking the wind speed. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. This had to be precise, surgical even. I wanted the compost to hit the cutout and nothing else. No collateral damage, just a direct hit on Karen's ego. Meanwhile, at Karen's house on the other side of Maple Grove, she was putting the final touches on her big day. Emily had overheard her talking to a caterer on her front porch, barking orders about tablecloths and ice sculptures. Everything has to be perfect for Senator Harper, Karen had snapped, her Bluetooth headset blinking even though she wasn't on a call. This is my chance to show him what a real leader looks like. Emily said Karen had even ordered a custom banner that read Maple Grove Estates, a beacon of order, which was so on-brand it made my skin crawl. She had no idea that while she was obsessing over napkin colors, I was 5 miles away, loading my helicopter with a payload that would redefine disorder in her perfect little world. By Saturday morning, I was up before the sun, my nerves buzzing with a mix of adrenaline and anticipation. I did a final walk-around of my helicopter, checking every bolt, every wire, every rotor blade. The compost bucket was secured, filled to the brim with aged manure Hank had helped me load the day before. "You sure about this, Ethan?" he'd asked, his grin as wide as the Georgia sky. "Never been more sure of anything in my life," I'd replied, shaking his hand. I filed a flight plan with the FAA, labeled as a routine community flyover for agricultural mapping, vague enough to avoid questions, but legit enough to keep me in the clear. I wasn't just covering my bases, I was building a fortress of legality around this plan. As I finished my prep, the Unity celebration was kicking off at the park. Emily texted me a photo of the setup: rows of folding chairs filled with residents, a long table with a white tablecloth piled high with sandwiches and lemonade, and that ridiculous banner flapping in the breeze. Karen stood at the podium, her pastel cardigan practically glowing in the sunlight, welcoming everyone with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Today, we celebrate the strength of our community," she began, her voice echoing through the microphone. "A community I've worked tirelessly to protect from those who think they're above the rules." The crowd clapped, and I could almost feel her gaze searching the sky, as if she sensed something was coming. She had no idea how right she was. I climbed into my cockpit, my heart pounding in my chest, and started the engine. The rotor blades whirred to life, a steady hum that felt like a battle cry. I lifted off, the ground falling away beneath me, and set my course for the park. From 300 feet up, I could see the crowd below, a sea of pastel polos and sundresses, all gathered to worship at the altar of Karen's clipboard. My camera was rolling, the GPS was locked, and my finger hovered over the release switch. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. Karen wanted to ground me, but I was about to show her that the sky always wins. The rotor blades of my helicopter thrummed like a heartbeat as I hovered 300 feet above the Maple Grove Community Park. My eyes locked on the scene below. The Unity celebration was in full swing, rows of folding chairs packed with residents, a long table of sandwiches and lemonade, and Karen at the podium, her voice droning through the microphone about order and community values. From up here, she looked like a pastel-colored dictator, her clipboard gleaming in the sunlight like a badge of honor. But my gaze shifted to the side, where my cardboard Karen stood tall, her painted scowl staring down the crowd. My finger hovered over the release switch, and I whispered to myself, "This is for every rule you broke, Karen." I hit the button, and the compost bucket swung open with a soft click, unleashing a glorious cascade of farm-fresh manure right onto the cutout. From above, it was a thing of beauty, a dark, arcing stream that hit the cardboard Karen dead on, flattening her in a single, smelly explosion. A cloud of dried straw and compost burst outward like confetti from a piñata of petty revenge. The crowd below erupted into chaos. People screamed, chairs toppled, and Karen's voice cut off mid-sentence with a shriek that I could hear even through my noise-canceling headset. "What in the?" she yelled, her arms flailing as she spun around, searching the sky. Senator Harper, who'd been sitting in the front row, jumped to his feet, shielding himself with a program booklet like it was a bulletproof vest. A few residents bolted for cover, while others stood frozen, their mouths gaping as they tried to process what had just happened. One kid in the back shouted, "The squirrels are fighting back," and I couldn't help but laugh into my cockpit recorder. I kept my helicopter steady, the camera on my rig capturing every second of the pandemonium. The compost had landed exactly where I'd planned, right on the cutout, with just enough splatter to send a message but not enough to hit the crowd. It was a surgical strike, a masterpiece of suburban justice. Karen's perfect event was now a muddy mess, her banner flapping sadly in the breeze as bits of straw stuck to it like a badge of shame. She pointed furiously at the sky, her face redder than the tomatoes on the sandwich table, and screamed, "Ethan Carter, I know that's you." Oh, she knew. And I wanted her to. I dipped my helicopter just low enough for the crowd to see my tail number, a slow, deliberate taunt, before I turned back toward home, the sound of her shrieks fading into the distance. As I flew away, my heart was pounding with a mix of adrenaline and triumph. I'd done it. I'd turned Karen's precious Unity celebration into a literal dunk show, and I had the footage to prove it. But down below, the chaos was just beginning to unfold. Emily, who'd been sitting in the back row with her phone out, later told me the crowd's reaction was like something out of a disaster movie. Half the residents were laughing hysterically, the other half were horrified, covering their noses as the smell of aged manure wafted through the air. Senator Harper, bless his heart, tried to keep his composure, but Emily said he muttered, "I didn't sign up for this," before speed walking to his car, his security detail trailing behind him. Karen, meanwhile, was in full meltdown mode. She grabbed the microphone, her voice trembling with rage, and shouted, "This is an attack on our community. Ethan Carter will pay for this." But her words were drowned out by a group of teenagers who started chanting, "Sky King. Sky King," as they pointed at my retreating helicopter. Back at my place, I landed smoothly on my helipad, the rotor blades slowing to a stop as I sat there, catching my breath. I couldn't wipe the grin off my face. I just pulled off the most epic act of revenge Maple Grove Estates had ever seen, and I felt like a hero in my own story. I climbed out of the cockpit and pulled up the footage on my camera, watching the drop in slow motion. The way the compost hit the cutout, the way it exploded outward in a cloud of justice, it was even better than I'd imagined. I saved the video to my laptop, knowing it was going to be my trophy, my proof that sometimes the little guy can fight back and win. But while I was celebrating my victory, things at the park were spiraling further out of control. Emily texted me updates in real time, her messages a mix of emojis and all-caps excitement. "Karen is losing it," she wrote, followed by a video clip she'd recorded on her phone. In the clip, Karen was stomping around the podium, her cardigan now streaked with dirt from where she'd tripped in the chaos. She was yelling at the caterers, who were packing up their table in a hurry, and at the residents, who were either laughing or fleeing the scene. "This is not what Maple Grove stands for," she screamed, her voice cracking. But the crowd wasn't listening. A few of the younger residents had started taking selfies with the flattened cardboard Karen, posing with peace signs and captioning their photos, "Long live the Sky King." Emily's next text read, "You're a legend, Ethan. This is going viral." And she wasn't kidding. By the time I'd showered and cracked open a cold soda, my phone was blowing up with notifications. Someone had posted Emily's video on TikTok, and it already had 20,000 views in under 30 minutes. The comments were a mix of shock and hilarity. Did that helicopter just drop poop on an HOA meeting? And "This guy is my hero." Someone had even added dramatic music to the clip, syncing the drop to the beat of a hip-hop track. I couldn't stop laughing as I scrolled through the reactions, but a small part of me wondered what would happen next. I just turned Karen's world upside down, but I knew she wasn't going to take this lying down. She'd come for me harder than ever, and I had to be ready. As the sun set over Maple Grove, I sat on my porch, watching the sky turn a deep orange, the same sky that had just delivered my revenge. I thought about the people at that meeting, the ones who'd clapped for Karen, the ones who'd laughed at her downfall, and the ones who'd called me the Sky King. I'd struck a nerve, not just with Karen, but with everyone who'd ever felt suffocated by her rules. And as I sipped my soda, I couldn't help but wonder, had I just started something bigger than I'd planned? One thing was for sure, Karen's reign of terror was on shaky ground, and I was the one who'd shaken it. As I sat on my porch that evening, the Georgia sky glowing a fiery orange, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. 20,000 views had turned into 150,000 in just a few hours. And the TikTok video of my manure drop was spreading like wildfire across Maple Grove Estates and beyond. I couldn't help but grin as I scrolled through the comments. Sky King strikes again. And Karen got what she deserved. But beneath the thrill of my viral victory, a tiny knot of worry tightened in my chest. I just turned Karen's HOA kingdom into a laughingstock, and if I knew anything about her, it was that she'd come for me with everything she had. I was ready for the fight, but I had no idea how fast things were about to spiral. By the next morning, Maple Grove was split into two camps. On one side were Karen's loyalists, mostly the folks who'd spent years measuring their grass with rulers and reporting neighbors for unapproved mailbox decals. They were furious, flooding the HOA's online forum with posts calling me a menace to society and demanding my immediate expulsion from the neighborhood. But on the other side was a growing group I hadn't expected, the Free Sky Crew. as they started calling themselves. These were the neighbors who'd always kept quiet under Karen's reign, the ones who'd rolled their eyes at her rules but never dared to speak up. Now, they were rallying behind me, leaving notes in my mailbox that said things like, "You're our hero, Ethan," and "Thanks for giving Karen what she deserved." One guy, a quiet dad named Mike, even painted Sky King rules on his shed in bright blue letters, right where Karen would see it on her morning power walk. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. That afternoon, I got a call from Emily, her voice a mix of excitement and panic. "Ethan, you need to see this," she said, sending me a link to a live stream on the Maple Grove HOA's Facebook page. I clicked it, and there was Karen, standing on her perfectly manicured lawn, holding a press conference like she was running for governor. Her face was beet red, her cardigan slightly askew, and she clutched her clipboard like a lifeline. "Ethan Carter has attacked our community with his reckless behavior," she declared, her voice trembling with rage. "He dropped filth from the sky, ruining a sacred event meant to unite us. This is not what Maple Grove stands for." The handful of loyalists behind her nodded solemnly, but the comments on the live stream told a different story. "Sky King for president," one read. Another, "Karen, you towed his helicopter. What did you expect?" I couldn't help but laugh, but then Karen dropped a bombshell. "I've retained a lawyer," she said, her eyes narrowing at the camera. "Ethan Carter will face charges for public endangerment, emotional distress, and aerial assault with organic material." Aerial assault? I nearly spit out my coffee. This woman was unhinged. I called Ryan immediately, my heart racing as I forwarded him the live stream. "She's suing me for what now?" I asked, my voice a mix of disbelief and amusement. Ryan, who'd been tracking the viral video's spread, laughed so hard I thought he'd drop the phone. "Ethan, this is the most ridiculous lawsuit I've ever seen," he said, his voice crackling with glee. "She's got nothing. You didn't touch anyone. You didn't damage public property, and the FAA logs show you were in full compliance. That cardboard cutout? Technically your property. She's throwing a tantrum in a business suit, and it's not going to hold up." I exhaled, relief washing over me, but Ryan wasn't done. "But here's the best part," he added. "The HOA board just called an emergency meeting to vote on her removal. Your little stunt might have just ended her reign for good." Sure enough, that evening, the HOA board held a closed-door meeting at the clubhouse, and Emily was there to give me the scoop. She said the room was packed, with residents on both sides of the debate shouting over each other. Karen tried to defend herself, claiming she'd protected the community by towing my helicopter, but the Free Sky crew wasn't having it. Mike, the dad with the painted shed, stood up and said, "Karen, you broke the law when you towed Ethan's helicopter, and now you're mad he fought back? He saved lives with that chopper. What have you done besides find people for their flower colors?" The room erupted in cheers, and Karen's face turned a shade of purple I didn't think was humanly possible. By the end of the night, the board voted 6-1 to remove her as president, effective immediately. Karen stormed out, screaming about lawsuits and recounts, but no one listened. Her clipboard tyranny was over. The next day, a new president was appointed, Laura, a retired schoolteacher who'd always stayed out of the drama. Laura called me that afternoon, her voice warm but firm. "Ethan, I don't condone what you did, but I understand why you did it," she said. "Karen pushed you too far, and she pushed a lot of us too far. I'd like you to be a consultant for the HOA, help us with airspace rules and community safety. No more citations for silly things like hummingbird feeders, I promise." I was stunned. Me, on the HOA board? After everything? I told her I'd think about it, but deep down, I knew I didn't need a title to make a difference. I'd already done that from 300 feet up. Meanwhile, the viral video kept spreading, racking up 1.2 million views by the end of the week. Local news stations picked it up, with headlines like "Pilot Drops Justice on HOA Tyrant" and "Maple Grove Manure Mayhem Shakes Suburbia." A late-night show host even dubbed me Captain Compost, and a parody Twitter account called that Sky King Ethan started posting fake HOA rules like "Thou shalt not fly higher than Karen's ego." I couldn't go to the grocery store without someone stopping me to shake my hand or ask for a selfie. I'd never meant to become a legend. I just wanted my helicopter back, but somehow, I'd become the face of every homeowner who'd ever been crushed by a petty tyrant. As for Karen, her fall was as spectacular as my drop. She put her house on the market 10 days after her ousting, and a real estate agent told me she left a note taped to the fridge that read, "This neighborhood doesn't deserve me." No one cried as her moving van pulled away. In fact, a group of teenagers stood on the corner, holding up a cardboard helicopter and dropping handfuls of leaves for dramatic effect as she drove off. It was the perfect goodbye to a woman who'd ruled with an iron clipboard for far too long. Maple Grove was finally free, and I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride knowing I'd played a part in that. A month after the manure drop heard round Maple Grove Estates, I stood in my backyard, watching the morning sun glint off my helicopter's rotor blades, a quiet sense of peace settling over me for the first time in ages. The chaos had finally died down, but the impact of that day lingered like the faint scent of compost on a breezy afternoon. I'd gone from being the neighborhood's quiet pilot to a full-blown symbol of rebellion, and as I sipped my coffee, I couldn't help but smile at how far this wild ride had taken me. Maple Grove was a different place now, and I'd played a part in that change, one rotor blade at a time. Life after Karen's fall was almost comically normal. The HOA meetings, once a battleground of passive-aggressive citations, turned into actual discussions about community improvements. Laura, the new president, kept her promise. No more fines for hummingbird feeders or emotionally jarring paint colors. Kids started playing in the streets again, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood, and Mike even built a treehouse for his son without a single complaint. I saw Emily repaint her mailbox a bright teal, a color Karen once called a crime against aesthetics, and no one batted an eye. It was like Maple Grove had woken up from a long, clipboard-induced nightmare, and we were all breathing a little easier. But the ripple effects of my stunt went far beyond our little suburb. The viral video hit 3.5 million views by the end of the month, and I started getting letters, actual, handwritten letters, from people all over the country. A woman in Ohio wrote, "Thank you for standing up to your Karen. Ours fined me for my dog's bark being too loud. You're my hero." A guy in Texas sent me a photo of himself holding a sign that read, "Compost the Control Freaks," in front of his HOA office. I even got a package from a pilot in Colorado, a tiny model helicopter with a bucket attached, labeled Sky King Jr. I hung it on my fridge, right next to a framed still of the cardboard Karen mid-collapse. A reminder of the day I took back my freedom. The FAA reached out too, but not in the way I'd feared. I opened a certified envelope one morning, half expecting a fine, but instead found a plaque inside. It read, "In recognition of innovative community engagement from the skies, the Federal Aviation Administration awards this honorary commendation to Ethan Carter, pilot, neighbor, and unintentional hero." There was a handwritten note attached. "Next time, try confetti, less paperwork." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. I hung the plaque in my living room, where it caught the light just right, a shiny testament to the fact that sometimes, the best way to fight back is with a little creativity and a lot of altitude. I never did take Laura up on her offer to join the HOA board. I didn't need a title to make a difference, and honestly, I'd had enough of meetings to last a lifetime. But I did agree to give a few helicopter tours to some of the older residents who'd always been curious about seeing Maple Grove from above. Mrs. Thompson, a sweet 80-year-old who'd once baked me cookies after I airlifted her grandson to the hospital, said as we soared over the park, "It looks so peaceful up here, Ethan. No wonder you fought so hard to keep flying." I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. This was why I did what I did. Not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever felt grounded by someone else's rules. One crisp Saturday morning, as I took off for a routine flight, I did a slow loop over the park, the same place where I'd dropped my payload of justice. Down below, a group of kids waved at me, their tiny hands flapping like little flags. Mike had painted a mural on his shed roof that read, "Land here if Karen returns," and I chuckled as I flew over it. I hadn't touched the compost bucket since that day, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to. That single moment had said more than 1,000 HOA complaints ever could. It was a reminder to everyone in Maple Grove, and to me, that sometimes the best way to defend your peace isn't with a fight, but with a well-placed message from the sky. Looking back, I never set out to be a legend. I just wanted to land my helicopter in peace, to do my job, to save lives without someone like Karen turning my passion into a neighborhood scandal. But when she towed my chopper, when she tried to ground not just my aircraft, but my entire freedom to exist as I am, I had to remind her, and everyone else, that some of us fly higher, not because we have to, but because we can. Maple Grove is better for it, and so am I. The kids still call me Sky King when I walk by, and every so often, I'll catch a neighbor giving me a knowing nod, a silent thank you for shaking things up. Karen may be gone, but her legacy lives on as a cautionary tale. Don't mess with a pilot who's got altitude and a bucket on standby. So what about you? Have I inspired you to stand up to your own Karen? Or maybe just to laugh a little harder at the absurdity of HOA drama? If you've loved this wild ride as much as I've loved living it, hit that subscribe button. I've got plenty more stories where this came from, and I'd love to have you along for the next flight.